I need to make this call, I said, tapping my manicured finger against my phone screen. The text message from my brother Mark glowed mockingly. Emergency. Need to talk ASAP. Please call. 3 years of silence, and now this. My coworker Zoe glanced over from her desk, raising an eyebrow at my hesitation. I took a deep breath and dialed, each ring echoing the familiar anxiety I thought I'd finally outgrown. When Mark's voice broke through, strained, humbled, desperate, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Emily, thank God. We need your help. The bank's foreclosing on Mom and Dad's house. Everything's falling apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It wasn't satisfaction I felt in that moment, or even vindication. Just the quiet certainty that comes from watching consequences finally arrive after years of waiting. I had predicted this day would come. In fact, I had documented exactly how and when it would happen, with the same meticulous attention to detail that had earned me 3 promotions at Pacific Northwest Financial Advisors. I'll stop by tomorrow, I replied, my voice steady. Text me a time that works. After hanging up, I caught Zoe staring. What was that about? She asked. You look like you just closed $1 million account. Just family, I said, turning back to my computer where a spreadsheet displayed the Chen family finances. Every poor decision, every missed opportunity, every financial warning I'd issued and they'd ignored, all documented in perfect chronological order. They finally realized they need a financial analyst in the family. My name is Emily Chen, 32 years old, and until 3 years ago, I was the dutiful daughter of Robert and Linda Chen, living in Portland, Oregon. I built my career at Pacific Northwest Financial Advisors, where I specialized in helping clients recover from financial crises, foreclosures, bankruptcies, catastrophic debt. My colleagues called me the fixer, ironic considering I couldn't fix my own family. I graduated summa cum laude from Reed College with a double major in economics and mathematics, then earned my MBA from Wharton. My parents attended neither. Graduation. Mark's buying his first investment property that weekend, they explained the first time. Sophia's pregnant again, was the excuse the second time. My achievements always seemed to coincide with something more important happening in my brother's life. Mark was the golden child, the son who stayed close to home, who went into the family real estate business, who married Sophia from the respectable Wong family, who gave my parents 3 grandchildren and Sunday dinners every week. I was the daughter who moved downtown, who worked 80-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder, who remained single, who came home only for major holidays, and sometimes not even then. The distance between us grew gradually, in the way family estrangements often do. A missed birthday call here, an uncomfortable political disagreement there, a growing sense that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. I told myself it was just the natural drift of adult relationships, nothing personal. I was wrong. Thanksgiving 3 years ago was the breaking point. I arrived at my parents' Lake Oswego home at exactly 4 p.m., the time specified in my mother's text message. I'd brought an expensive bottle of wine and homemade cranberry sauce, my grandmother's recipe, the one thing I'd learned to cook properly. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside. More guests than just our immediate family, which was unusual. I rang the doorbell, arms full, and waited. When my mother finally opened the door, her expression shifted from welcome to confusion to poorly disguised panic. Emily, what are you doing here? Behind her, I could see the dining room table, beautifully set with the good china, candles lit, turkey steaming in the center. Around it sat my brother, his wife, their children, and another family I recognized as my father's business associates, the Wilsons. Mom, it's Thanksgiving. You texted me to come at 4. I pulled out my phone, ready to show her the message. My mother's eyes darted back toward the full table, then to me. "Oh, honey, that was for next year's planning. I told you we were going small this year because of your father's health concerns." My father, visible through the doorway, was carving the turkey with vigor that belied any health issues. He hadn't even looked up at the commotion. "No," I said, slowly. "You didn't tell me that." Mark appeared behind my mother, wine glass in hand. "Hey, Em, didn't Mom tell you? We're keeping it low-key this year. Just immediate family and the Wilsons. Dad's trying to bring them in as investors." I stood there, cranberry sauce growing heavy in my arms, as the realization settled over me. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been deliberately excluded. And immediate family, apparently, didn't include me. "I see," I said finally. "Well, don't let me interrupt your business dinner. You could join," my mother offered half-heartedly, "but we haven't set a place for you, and Mrs. Wilson is allergic to cranberries." I handed her the wine bottle. "Enjoy your evening." As I walked back to my car, I heard the door close behind me with a decisive click. No one followed. No one called. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "So sorry about the mix-up. We'll do Christmas instead?" The carefully constructed fiction was already taking shape. There had been no mix-up. The text clearly specified this year. But gaslighting had long been my family's preferred method of conflict resolution, and I'd played along for most of my life. Not this time. Instead of driving back to my apartment, I went to the office. It was empty on Thanksgiving evening, which suited me perfectly. I needed to think, and I always thought best surrounded by spreadsheets and financial projections. My family had always treated my career as something vaguely embarrassing. "All those numbers," my mother would sigh, as if I spent my days counting beans rather than restructuring multi-million-dollar portfolios. But numbers never lied. Numbers never excluded you from Thanksgiving dinner. Numbers never pretended you were less important than business associates. I pulled up my parents' financial information, documents they'd reluctantly provided years ago when I'd offered to help with retirement planning, an offer they'd ultimately rejected in favor of Mark's more practical real estate investment scheme. Looking at the figures with fresh eyes, I saw what I'd missed before. The over-leveraging, the cash flow problems, the risky investments. My brother was guiding my parents toward financial ruin, and they were following willingly, blinded by familial trust. That night, I started a new spreadsheet. Not out of vengeance, but out of professional curiosity. How long would it take for my family's financial house of cards to collapse? Based on market projections, interest rates, and their current trajectory, I estimated 3 years. I titled the file Chen Family Forecast and set a calendar reminder for quarterly updates. On my drive home, I called Lucas, my best friend since college. "I need a new Thanksgiving tradition," I told him, voice steadier than I felt. "What happened?" His concern was immediate. I explained the evening's events, the spreadsheet, the 3-year projection. Am I horrible for basically plotting out my family's financial demise? "You're not plotting anything," Lucas said firmly. "You're observing mathematical realities they're choosing to ignore. There's a difference." His words were comforting, but as I curled up alone in my apartment that night, the distinction felt academic. I had already decided not to warn them again. My professional advice had been dismissed too many times. Now I would watch events unfold with the detached interest of a financial analyst observing a case study in poor decision-making. The following weeks brought half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, a Christmas invitation I politely declined, a birthday card with a generic message. I responded with equal politeness and growing distance. By the new year, our communication had dwindled to obligatory holiday text. I continued updating my Chen family forecast spreadsheet, noting with grim accuracy that each quarter brought them closer to the financial cliff I'd predicted. I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. If my birth family didn't value me, I would build a life with people who did. Zoe became more than a coworker. A friend who understood ambition wasn't a character flaw. Lucas introduced me to his wider circle, people who invited me to their homes for holidays without hidden agendas. Nathan, my mentor at Pacific Northwest Financial, recognized my talent and became the father figure I'd never really had. You have an unusual ability to detach emotionally from financial disasters, Nathan observed during one performance review. It makes you excellent in crisis situations. I almost told him then about my ongoing documentation of my family's impending financial disaster, but something held me back. It was one thing to observe from a distance. It would be another to share my clinical dissection of their mistakes with others. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was helping clients rebuild their financial lives, I was watching my own family destroy theirs from afar. Each quarterly update to my spreadsheet confirmed my initial projections. Mark's real estate company was over-leveraged, taking on too many properties with too little capital. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My parents had remortgaged their home to invest more with him. Interest rates were rising. The housing market was cooling. It was basic economics, the kind I explained to entry-level clients every day. In the second year of my self-imposed family exile, I received a promotion that came with a corner office overlooking the Willamette River. At the celebration dinner, surrounded by colleagues who had become friends, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. To Emily, Nathan toasted, whose ability to see financial truth clearly has saved countless clients from disaster. And to found family, Lucas added, raising his glass alongside the others. That night, I updated my Chen family forecast with recent market shifts. According to my calculations, the collapse would come sooner than expected, within 8 months rather than the original year remaining. I closed the file and tried not to think about what would happen to my parents when they lost their home, the one where I'd grown up, where family photos still included me. 6 months later, I received the first tentative contact from Mark in over 2 years. A text message asking about current interest rates and bank policies on foreclosures. I didn't respond. A month after that, my mother called, leaving a voicemail about catching up that made no mention of financial difficulties. I texted back that I was busy with work, but hoped they were well. And then, exactly 2 years and 10 months after that Thanksgiving exclusion, came Mark's emergency text. I'd been off in my projections by only 2 months. When I pulled into my parents' driveway the next day, I was struck by how little had changed externally. The house looked the same: colonial style, immaculately maintained front garden, American flag by the door. Only someone with trained eyes would notice the deferred maintenance. Gutters that needed cleaning, paint beginning to peel around the windows, a crack in the driveway that had been there on my last visit but had clearly widened. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell. She'd aged more than 3 years should account for, new lines around her eyes, her characteristic perfect hair showing more gray than I remembered. "Emily," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for coming." Inside, Mark and my father sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, bank notices, legal documents, bills marked "Final Notice." My brother looked up, his formerly confident expression replaced by desperation. "The bank's giving us 30 days, he said without preamble. "Dad's business is underwater, my properties are being repossessed, and this house..." He gestured helplessly at the papers. I set my purse down and took a seat at the table, not at my old spot, but at the head, where guests usually sat. "Start from the beginning," I said, using the same tone I used with new clients facing financial catastrophe. I need to understand everything if I'm going to help." They talked for nearly 2 hours, interrupting each other, sometimes arguing about whose idea certain investments had been. The story emerged in pieces. Mark's real estate company had expanded too quickly, taking on properties that needed extensive renovation. My father had invested heavily, leveraging his own business assets. When the market turned, they'd been caught with too much debt and too little income. They'd remortgaged the family home trying to stay afloat. Now everything was in foreclosure. Throughout their explanation, no one mentioned the Thanksgiving incident. No one apologized for years of dismissing my concerns. No one acknowledged that I had warned them precisely about these risks. When they finished, silence fell over the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd been told countless times that my financial expertise was too theoretical, not practical like Mark's real-world business experience. "Can you fix this?" my father finally asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I could, to some extent. I'd researched their situation thoroughly, preparing for this moment even while telling myself it would never come. I knew which banks held their loans, which had more favorable restructuring policies, which legal avenues might give them breathing room. I could buy them time, possibly save the business, though the house was likely beyond saving. But the question wasn't whether I could help. It was whether I would. "I need to see all your financial records," I said instead of answering directly. "Everything. Tax returns, bank statements, loan documents, credit reports, and I need complete honesty about your current income and expenses." My mother looked relieved, as if help was already on the way. Mark looked suspicious, perhaps wondering what I'd require in exchange. My father just looked defeated. "And," I continued, "I need to understand something first." I met each of their eyes in turn. 3 years ago, you excluded me from Thanksgiving dinner. Not because of a mix-up, not because of health concerns, but because I didn't fit into whatever image you were presenting to the Wilsons. You chose to erase me from the family narrative when it was convenient. Now you want me to use my expertise, the same expertise you've dismissed for years, to save you. Why should I? The stunned silence that followed told me they hadn't expected this direct confrontation. They'd expected the dutiful daughter, eager to be included again at any price. "That's not fair," Mark started, his defensive tone so familiar it almost made me smile. "That was one dinner." "It wasn't just one dinner," I cut him off. "It was years of treating my career, my advice, and ultimately me as less valuable than whatever scheme you were pursuing at the moment. I warned you about over-leveraging. I warned you about market volatility. I warned you about exactly this scenario. You ignored me then. But now that you're facing foreclosure, suddenly my expertise matters?" My mother was crying silently. My father stared at the table. Only Mark tried to maintain the family fiction. "We made some mistakes," he admitted grudgingly. "But we're still family. Families help each other." I opened my purse and removed a USB drive, placing it on the table, between us. "This contains a spreadsheet I started the night of that Thanksgiving. I called it the Chen family forecast. It projects the financial collapse you're experiencing now, based on the decisions you were making then. I've updated it quarterly for 3 years. It predicted this outcome almost to the month." They stared at the small device as if it might explode. "You've been documenting our financial problems?" My father looked up, confusion and the first flicker of anger crossing his face. "I've been observing mathematical realities you chose to ignore," I corrected, echoing Lucas's words from years ago. "And now you have a choice. I can help you, but only with complete transparency and acknowledgement of how we got here. No more family fictions. No more pretending my expertise is theoretical while Mark's is practical. The numbers don't lie, and neither will I." The silence stretched longer this time. I waited, feeling neither triumph nor vindication, just a calm certainty that regardless of their decision, I would walk out of this house knowing I had spoken my truth. Finally, my father reached for the USB drive. "Show us," he said simply. And that was how I found myself sitting at my childhood kitchen table, projecting my Chen family forecast onto the wall, walking my family through 3 years of financial decline they had caused and I had documented. I explained each projection, each warning sign, each alternative path they could have taken. The presentation lasted an hour. When I finished, no one spoke immediately. Then my mother, who had rarely involved herself in financial discussions, looked at me with new eyes. "You really do know what you're talking about," she said, as if this were a revelation after my 15 years in finance. "Can you help us save the house?" "The house is likely gone," I said honestly. "But I can help you transition with dignity, protect Dad's business assets where possible, and create a restructuring plan for Mark's company. What I can't do is wave a magic wand and erase 3 years of poor decisions." "And what do you want in return?" Mark asked, always the negotiator. I closed my laptop and considered the question. What did I want? Revenge had never been my motivation, despite what they might think. The meticulous documentation had been partly self-protection, evidence that I wasn't crazy, that my concerns had been valid, and partly professional habit. "I want acknowledgement," I said finally. "Not just today in crisis, but going forward. Acknowledgement that my expertise has value, that I have value as a financial advisor and as a family member. No more exclusions when they're convenient. No more dismissals of my professional opinion. No more treating me as less important than business associates or potential investors." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair. And one more thing," I added. "This Thanksgiving, I'm hosting at my apartment. I've made new traditions with friends who've become family to me. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, you need to be willing to fit into my life sometimes, not just expect me to fit into yours." In the months that followed, I helped my family navigate their financial collapse with the same precision. I'd used to document its approach. My parents lost the house, moving into a modest condo that actually better suited their needs. My father's business survived in streamlined form. Mark's company declared bankruptcy, but I helped him salvage one promising property that could become the foundation for a more sustainable business model. More importantly, our family dynamics shifted, not overnight and not without setbacks, but gradually towards something more balanced. My expertise was consulted rather than dismissed. My absence was noted rather than overlooked. My boundaries were respected rather than ignored. Last Thanksgiving, they came to my apartment, all of them, including Mark's family. Lucas and Zoe joined us, along with Nathan and his wife. My mother brought her famous sweet potato casserole. My father carved the turkey I'd somehow managed not to burn. Mark's children played video games on my rarely used living room TV. It wasn't perfect. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced. But as I looked around my dining table, I realized I'd gained something unexpected from those 3 years of documentation and distance. Not just professional validation or personal vindication, but a clearer understanding of what family could be, chosen in birth, bound not by obligation but by mutual respect. The Chen family forecast spreadsheet still exists on my computer, a reminder of where we've been. But I haven't updated it in months. Some things I've learned don't need to be quantified to have value. For the following week after discovering that spreadsheet, I found myself moving through life in a strange fog. During the day, I performed my job with mechanical precision, advising clients, analyzing portfolios, attending meetings. My colleagues noticed nothing amiss. I'd perfected the art of professional composure years ago, when I realized showing emotion in finance meant being taken less seriously, especially as a woman of color in a predominantly white male industry. But at night, alone in my apartment overlooking the glittering Portland skyline, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my discovery. It wasn't just anger, though that simmered beneath the surface. It was a profound sense of betrayal that my own family, The people who should value me most had so casually erased me from their narrative. The Thanksgiving dinner was merely the final act in a long pattern of diminishment. Growing up as the second child and only daughter in a traditional Chen household had never been easy. My parents immigrated from Taiwan in their 20s, carrying with them certain expectations about family roles and filial obligations. Mark, being the firstborn son, automatically inherited a position of privilege. I was expected to be supportive, accommodating, and ultimately secondary. As children, this manifested in small ways. Mark got the new bicycle while I received his hand-me-down, even though I was the one who actually enjoyed cycling. When we both brought home straight A's, my father would ruffle Mark's hair and say, "That's my boy," while my mother would simply nod at my report card and say, "As expected." Excellence was my baseline. For Mark, it was cause for celebration. I'd pushed back against these dynamics in my own quiet ways. When Mark followed our father into real estate, I deliberately chose finance, adjacent enough to earn grudging approval, but distinct enough to carve my own path. When my parents pressured me about marriage in my 20s, I threw myself into my career with such intensity that they eventually stopped asking, not because they accepted my choices, but because they'd categorized me. The career-focused daughter, who wouldn't provide grandchildren or Sunday dinners. The family narrative became that I had chosen to distance myself. The reality was more complex. I'd tried for years to maintain connections on more equal terms. I'd offered financial advice. That was ignored. I'd suggested alternative gathering times that worked with my schedule. I'd reached out with phone calls and texts that received delayed, perfunctory responses. The Thanksgiving exclusion simply confirmed what I'd long suspected. In the Chen family hierarchy, I was expendable. My phone chimed with a text from Lucas. "Drinks tonight? You've been too quiet this week." Lucas Torres had been my rock since we met in an advanced economics seminar at Reed College. The son of Mexican immigrants, he understood the particular pressures of first-generation American children. His own family had similar expectations. His brothers were supposed to take over the family restaurant business, while Lucas broke the mold by becoming an environmental lawyer. We bonded over being the family disappointments despite our professional successes. "Can't tonight," I texted back, working late on something personal. The Chen family forecast spreadsheet glowed on my laptop screen. I'd spent hours refining it, inputting variables, running scenarios. It wasn't just spite driving this project, though I couldn't deny the grim satisfaction of seeing the numbers, confirm what I'd warned them about for years. It was also professional curiosity. How precisely could I predict their financial collapse given the information I had? Very precisely, as it turned out. Based on public records, my knowledge of their business practices and market trends, I estimated they had between 36 months before everything imploded. Mark's real estate company had expanded too quickly, taking on properties that required significant renovation before they could turn a profit. My father had invested heavily in these ventures, leveraging both his business and personal assets. My mother, never financially savvy, had co-signed everything. When the housing market inevitably cooled, as it had begun to do already, they would find themselves overextended. The properties wouldn't sell for projected values. The renovations would cost more than budgeted. The loans would come due, and the house of cards would collapse. I saved the spreadsheet, password protected it, and closed my laptop. Tomorrow was a new day, and I had clients who actually valued my financial expertise. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Pacific Northwest Financial Advisors occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise with views of Mount Hood on clear days. My office, earned through consistent performance rather than family connections, faced the Willamette River. I'd decorated it minimally, no family photos, just my degrees on the wall, a small jade plant on the windowsill, and a contemporary print of geometric patterns that reminded me of financial modeling. Nathan Parker, my mentor since I'd joined the firm as an analyst fresh out of Wharton, stopped by with coffee. Black, no sugar. Exactly how I preferred it. "You look like you've been up all night with a complex model," he observed, setting the cup on my desk. Nathan had an uncanny ability to read people, which made him exceptional with clients and a valuable mentor. "Something like that," I admitted. "Family financial drama." Nathan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He knew the broad outlines of my family situation, enough to understand it was complicated, not enough to intrude. Instead, he shifted to work matters. "The Robinson portfolio review is at 10. They're nervous about the market fluctuations." "They're always nervous," I said, grateful for the change of subject. "I've run the projections. Even with the current volatility, they're well positioned for their retirement timeline." "That's why you're our rising star," Nathan said. "You see patterns others miss." After he left, I sat with his words echoing in my mind. Patterns. That's what financial analysis was ultimately about: recognizing patterns, predicting outcomes, preparing for contingencies. It was what made me good at my job. It was also what made my family's dismissal of my expertise so infuriating. They couldn't see the patterns that were painfully obvious to me. The Robinson meeting went smoothly. Mr. Robinson was a retired engineer who appreciated detailed analysis. Mrs. Robinson was a former nurse who focused more on their retirement lifestyle goals. They were ideal clients, respectful of expertise, clear about objectives, responsive to guidance. Everything my family was not. "We really appreciate your thoroughness, Emily," Mrs. Robinson said as the meeting concluded. "It's such a relief having someone we trust looking after our future." I smiled, the irony not lost on me. That's what I'm here for. Back at my desk, I found a text from my mother. "Sunday dinner this week? Mark has exciting news about new property development." The predictable pattern continued. Mark had exciting news that everyone was expected to celebrate, regardless of its financial wisdom. My presence was requested as audience member, not advisor, and the cycle of poor decisions would accelerate toward the crash I'd projected. I declined politely, citing work commitments. It wasn't entirely untrue, I did have reports to finish, but I could have made time if I'd wanted to. What I couldn't make time for was another evening of watching my family rush toward financial disaster while ignoring my warnings. Instead, I spent Sunday evening with Zoe Williams, a colleague who had become a friend over countless late nights preparing client presentations. We met at Rosewood Cafe, a cozy spot in my neighborhood known for exceptional pastries and strong coffee. Zoe was everything my family was not: straightforward, appreciative of expertise, and genuinely interested in my perspective. "So you're just going to watch them crash and burn?" she asked after I explained the Chen family forecast. "They've made it clear they don't want my input," I replied, stirring my cappuccino. "I've tried, Zoe. For years I've tried. They've chosen their path. Seems cold," she observed without judgment. I considered her words carefully. Did my detachment make me cold? Or was it a necessary protection against repeated rejection? Maybe, I conceded. But I'm tired of being the family Cassandra, always predicting disasters no one believes until they happen. It's professionally demoralizing and personally exhausting. Zoe nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Fair enough. Just don't let their bad choices make you bitter. You're too good at what you do to let family drama undermine your confidence." Her words stayed with me long after our evening ended. Was I allowing my family's dismissal to affect my professional identity? Was the Chen family forecast an act of petty revenge or professional validation? Maybe a bit of both. The following months settled into a rhythm. I excelled at work, earning a promotion that came with a corner office and a substantial raise. I expanded my social circle beyond colleagues, joining a hiking group that explored the Columbia River Gorge on weekends. I maintained minimal contact, with my family. Obligatory birthday calls, polite declines to most invitations, brief appearances at major holidays when avoidance would cause more drama than attendance. Each quarter, I updated the Chen family forecast with new data. Mark's company expanded into commercial properties, taking on even more debt. My father leveraged his retirement accounts to provide additional capital. Interest rates began to rise. The housing market showed signs of cooling. Each variable confirmed my projections. Occasionally, I felt twinges of guilt. Should I try again to warn them? But the memory of their dismissive responses to my previous attempts stopped me. Real estate always appreciates, my father had insisted. You're too conservative in your outlook, Mark had scoffed. That's why you're just analyzing other people's money instead of making your own. I remembered those words when I received a 6-figure bonus for a particularly successful client investment strategy. I remembered them when I was featured in Portland Business Journal's 40 Under 40. I remembered them when I paid off my student loans 5 years ahead of schedule and made the final payment on my downtown apartment. I wasn't just analyzing money. I was creating financial security through careful planning and risk assessment, exactly what my family refused to do. The first signs of their impending crisis appeared about 18 months after that Thanksgiving. Exclusion. My mother called unexpectedly one evening, her voice overly casual. Emily, do you know any good contractors? The one Mark recommended for our bathroom renovation left the job half-finished, and we're having trouble finding someone reliable. I knew what this meant. Cash flow problems. Contractors who weren't being paid walked away from jobs. The cascade had begun. I can ask around, I offered neutrally. How are things otherwise? Oh, fine, she said with forced cheerfulness. Your father's business is a little slow with the economic situation, but Mark says it's just temporary. I checked my spreadsheet after the call. Right on schedule. The housing market had declined 8% over the past quarter. Not a crash, but a significant cooling that would affect overextended investors first, like my family. 2 months later, Mark called for the first time in over a year. Hey, Em, he began without preamble. Quick question. Do you have any contacts at First National? Dad's trying to restructure some business loans and they're being difficult. I suppressed the urge to ask why he suddenly valued my banking connections when he'd previously dismissed my financial cautions. I know some people in commercial lending, I said carefully, but loan restructuring usually indicates deeper issues. Is everything okay with Dad's business? It's fine, Mark said quickly. Just a cash flow timing issue. The new developments are taking longer than expected to complete. I could have pointed out that timing issues don't typically require loan restructuring, but I knew he wouldn't listen. Not yet. The numbers hadn't become dire enough to break through their denial. I'll send you some contact information, I said instead. But Mark, if there are serious financial concerns, I'm happy to look at the whole picture. Sometimes an outside perspective helps. We've got it under control, he replied, that familiar dismissive tone returning. Just need to smooth things over with the bank. After we hung up, I updated the Chen family forecast. Based on his call and current market conditions, I adjusted my projection. The collapse would come sooner than my original estimate, within 8-10 months rather than the 12-18 remaining in my initial timeline. The truth was, I didn't want to be right. Despite everything, these were still the people who had raised me, who had paid for my undergraduate education, though I'd financed my MBA through scholarships and loans, who had shaped my earliest understanding of family, for better or worse. Their financial ruin wouldn't bring me joy, just a hollow confirmation of warnings unheeded. As spring turned to summer, the signs multiplied. My father stopped talking about his business at the few family gatherings I attended. My mother mentioned cutting back on luxuries with forced nonchalance. Mark's wife, Sophia, usually dressed in designer labels, appeared in simpler attire. Their oldest child's private school enrollment became public school registration. I continued, updating my spreadsheet, not with satisfaction, but with the professional detachment I brought to all financial analysis. The precision of my projections was actually remarkable, a fact I might have shared with colleagues as a case study in predictive modeling if it hadn't involved my own family. The direct acknowledgement of crisis came in late autumn, nearly 2 years after the Thanksgiving incident. My father called on a Tuesday afternoon, something he never did during business hours. "Emily," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have time for lunch this week? There's something I'd like to discuss." We met at a modest diner halfway between my office and his, a compromise location that seemed symbolic of our relationship. My father looked older than his 67 years, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. He ordered coffee but barely touched it. "Mark's company is in trouble," he said after several minutes of small talk. "Serious trouble, and I've invested quite heavily in it." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "How heavily?" He stared into his coffee. "Remortgaged the house. Used my business as collateral for some of the development loans. Liquidated most of my retirement accounts." Each admission confirmed a line item in my spreadsheet. I had known all of this, or at least projected it, but hearing him say it aloud still sent a chill through me. "Have you spoken with a financial advisor?" I asked carefully. My father looked up sharply. "You're a financial advisor?" "Yes," I acknowledged, "but you've never wanted my professional input before. You've made that very clear." He had the grace to look ashamed. "Pride," he said simply. "Foolish pride. I thought Mark and I understood the market better than you did. I thought real estate was more concrete than the financial instruments you work with." The irony was almost painful. My father had dismissed my expertise because it wasn't concrete enough, yet here he sat, facing the loss of every concrete asset he owned. "What are you asking of me?" I kept my tone measured, professional. "I don't know," he admitted. "Advice, I suppose. Help." I thought about all the times I'd offered both, only to be ignored or dismissed. I thought about the spreadsheet tracking their financial decline with dispassionate accuracy. I thought about the years of being the afterthought in family considerations, culminating in that Thanksgiving exclusion. "I'll need to see everything," I said finally. "All financial records, loan documents, property valuations, business accounts, complete transparency." "Of course," my father agreed quickly. "And I'll need you to understand something," I continued. "I'm not a miracle worker. I can't magically erase the consequences of years of high-risk financial decisions. What I can do is help you navigate the situation with minimum additional damage. That's all I'm asking," he said, relief evident in his voice. But it wasn't all he was asking, and we both knew it. He was asking for salvation without acknowledgement of how they'd reached this point. He was asking me to set aside years of dismissal, an exclusion to rescue them from consequences I had repeatedly warned about. I agreed to review their financial situation, but made no promises about outcomes. As we parted outside the diner, my father attempted an awkward hug, something he hadn't done since I was a child. "Your mother misses you," he said. "We all do." I stepped back, maintaining professional distance. "I've always been available, Dad. You all chose to exclude me from decisions, from gatherings, from the family narrative. That was your choice, not mine." He looked startled, as if this perspective had never occurred to him. "The Thanksgiving mix-up?" "It wasn't a mix-up," I interrupted firmly. "Mom texted me the time. You all were there with the Wilsons when I arrived. Then you gaslit me about it afterward, claiming it was my misunderstanding. That's not a mix-up. That's deliberate exclusion followed by manipulation." My father stared at me, speechless. Perhaps no one had ever called out the family dynamics so directly before. "I'll look at your financial records," I said, softening my tone slightly. But if we're going to work together on this, we need honesty about the finances and about our relationship. No more family fictions. As I walked back to my office, I felt a strange lightness. Whatever happened with their financial situation, and I knew it would be challenging at best, devastating at worst, I had finally spoken my truth. The carefully maintained family narrative had been disrupted, not by their financial crisis, but by my refusal to accept their revisionist history. That evening, I opened the Chen family forecast one last time. According to my projections, the complete collapse, foreclosure notices, business bankruptcy, would arrive within 6 weeks. But projections were just that, educated guesses based on available data. They didn't account for intervention, for course corrections, for the possibility of change. I saved the file under a new name, Chen Family Recovery Plan. Then I began a new spreadsheet. This one focused not on documenting their decline, but on mapping potential paths forward. It would require difficult decisions, significant downsizing, perhaps the loss of the family home. But with proper guidance, they might salvage something from the wreckage. The question remained whether they would actually follow my advice this time, or if the old patterns would reassert themselves once the immediate crisis passed. Only time would tell. But regardless of their choices, I had made mine. I would offer my professional expertise without compromising my personal boundaries. I would help without reverting to the role of overlooked, undervalued daughter. And perhaps, in the process of rebuilding their financial lives, we might begin to rebuild our relationship, not on the old foundation of hierarchy and expectation, but on something new, mutual respect, honest communication, and recognition of each other's true value. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, my mind already sifting through potential strategies for my family's financial situation. The analyst in me had taken over, approaching their crisis as I would any client's, objectively, methodically, with clear-eyed assessment of assets, liabilities, and options. But this wasn't just any client. This was my family. The same family that had dismissed my expertise for years until desperation forced them to acknowledge it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Dad said you're helping. When can we meet?" No thanks. No acknowledgement of past dismissals. Just the expectation that I would drop everything to rescue them. Typical. I took my time responding, finishing my morning routine first. 15 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes on the elliptical, machine in my home gym, shower, breakfast smoothie. Only then did I reply, "I can meet Saturday morning at my office. Bring all financial documents." Setting the meeting at my workplace rather than their home was deliberate, establishing professional boundaries from the start. Mark's response came immediately. "Can't we meet sooner? Bank called yesterday about foreclosure timeline." So it had begun. According to my Chen family forecast, the foreclosure notices would arrive approximately 8 to 10 weeks from now, but clearly things had accelerated. Perhaps they'd missed more payments than I realized, or the bank had less patience for restructuring than typical. I made a mental note to update my projections. "Saturday is the earliest I can accommodate," I replied. "I have client commitments until then." This wasn't strictly true. I could have rearranged my schedule, but I needed them to understand that their emergency didn't automatically become my emergency. Years of maintaining professional boundaries had taught me that lesson well. At work, I focused on my actual clients with my usual precision, but during lunch, I began researching options for my family's situation. Their case was unfortunately common. Overextended investors caught in a cooling market with insufficient cash reserves to weather the downturn. What made their situation particularly precarious was the extensive cross-collateralization. My parents' home securing loans for Mark's business ventures, my father's business assets backing residential property investments. When one domino fell, they would all follow. Nathan stopped by my office late afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with casual authority. At 52, he embodied the perfect balance of professional success and personal fulfillment. Respected in the industry, financially secure, yet still genuinely passionate about helping clients. He was what I aspired to become, minus the suburban home and golden retriever. "You've been quieter than usual today," he observed. "Everything all right?" I considered deflecting but opted for a partial truth. "Family financial issues. They've made some high-risk investments that are unraveling." Nathan nodded, understanding immediately. "And now they want your professional help after ignoring your advice?" "Something like that," I admitted. "Tricky territory," he said, stepping fully into my office and closing the door. "Family and finances rarely mix well. Add in past tensions and it's a potential minefield." "I know," I sighed, "but they're still family." "Which is why you need to set crystal clear boundaries," Nathan advised. "Document everything. Specify exactly what you're willing to do and what you're not. Make them sign acknowledgments if necessary. Treat them more formally than you would ordinary clients, not less." His advice mirrored my own instincts. "I've scheduled them for Saturday at the office rather than meeting at their home." "Good start," he approved. "And Emily, don't take responsibility for their decisions, past or future. You can advise, but they have to implement." That distinction would prove crucial in the coming weeks. The line between offering expertise and taking ownership of their problems. I thanked Nathan and returned to my research, feeling more centered. The rest of the week passed in a blur of client meetings and preparation for Saturday's family financial intervention. I created a comprehensive questionnaire for them to complete, similar to what I provided new clients but with additional sections specific to their situation. I pulled together resources on bankruptcy protection, loan modification programs, and downsizing strategies. I prepared myself mentally for their potential reactions: defensiveness, blame, denial. What I wasn't prepared for was the profound shift in family dynamics that awaited me. Saturday morning arrived clear and crisp, Portland's notoriously rainy, autumn granting a temporary reprieve. I arrived at the office an hour early, setting up the small conference room with professional detachment. Water bottles, legal pads, calculators, financial planning worksheets. The scene could have been any client meeting, except for the knot of tension in my stomach. My family arrived precisely at 9, punctuality being one of my father's few financial virtues. They entered as a unit, my father leading, my mother slightly behind him, Mark bringing up the rear with a bulging briefcase that presumably contained their financial records. What struck me immediately was their demeanor, subdued, almost defeated. The usual Chen family bravado had evaporated. "Thank you for meeting us," my father said formally, extending his hand as if we were business associates rather than blood relations. I shook it, noting the slight tremor in his grip. "Of course," I replied with professional courtesy. "Please sit down." They arranged themselves around the conference table, my parents on one side, Mark on the other. I took the position at the head, opening my laptop and pulling up the questionnaire I'd prepared. "Before we begin, I want to establish some parameters," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "I'm meeting with you today as a financial advisor, not just as a daughter or sister. That means I'll be direct about your situation. I'll provide objective analysis and recommendations. What I won't do is sugarcoat the reality or offer false reassurances. Does that work for everyone?" My mother looked startled by this formal approach, but my father nodded. "That's why we're here. We need the truth, not comfort." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "We already know the truth. We're in financial trouble. What we need are solutions." "Solutions begin with full understanding of the problem," I countered. "And based on our conversation earlier this week, Dad, I'm not convinced you have complete clarity on the extent of your situation. So let's start there." I distributed copies of the questionnaire. This needs to be completed with absolute honesty. No minimizing debts, no inflating asset values. No omitting. Accounts. I can only help if I have accurate information. My mother stared at the extensive document, her expression bewildered. Financial matters had always been handled by my father and Mark, with her serving merely as a signatory when required. This was likely the first time she'd been included in a comprehensive financial discussion. Perhaps we can just give you an overview and, Mark began. No, I interrupted firmly. This isn't a casual conversation. This is financial triage. I need details. My directness silenced him. They spent the next hour filling out the forms while I worked silently on other materials. Occasionally, I heard whispered conferences between them. Should we include the West Side property? What about the personal loan from Uncle James? Confirmations that they were indeed being thorough. When they finished, I collected the documents and began my analysis. What emerged was even worse than my projections had suggested. Mark's real estate company had negative equity of over $2 million. My parents' home had been remortgaged at 85% of its value, a value that had declined 15% in the current market, putting them underwater. My father's business was technically insolvent, kept afloat only by continual cash infusions from their personal savings, which were now depleted. Most concerning was the timeline. The foreclosure process on their home had already begun, with the first formal notice arriving just yesterday. 2 of Mark's commercial properties were in similar situations. The dominoes weren't just beginning to fall, they were halfway down. I looked up from the papers to find them watching me anxiously, like patients awaiting a diagnosis. In that moment, I felt an unexpected surge of compassion. They had made terrible financial decisions, ignored clear warnings, and dismissed my expertise. But they were still my family, and they were afraid. It's bad, I said simply. Worse than I anticipated, but not unfixable. It will require significant changes and sacrifices, however. Whatever it takes, my father said, with a firmness that surprised me. We're prepared to do what's necessary. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. Are you? Because that might mean losing the family home, downsizing dramatically, Mark's company declaring bankruptcy, Dad's business being restructured or possibly sold. These aren't minor adjustments. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. The house? But we've lived there for 30 years. All our memories. Mom, I said gently, memories don't pay mortgages. The house is underwater. You owe more than it's worth in the current market. And the foreclosure process has already begun. Mark leaned forward, that familiar defensive edge returning to his voice. There has to be another way. Maybe we could find new investors for my company. Turn things around. Your company has negative equity, Mark, I explained patiently. No rational investor would touch it. The best strategy is a structured bankruptcy that protects what personal assets you can salvage. Bankruptcy, my father repeated, the word clearly painful for him. In our culture, such financial failure carried extra weight, a loss of face, a public admission of flawed judgment. It's a legal protection, not a moral failing, I said, sensing his thoughts. And it's likely the most effective path forward. What followed was 3 hours of detailed analysis, option consideration, and increasingly difficult realizations for my family. I presented them with 3 potential strategies, each with its own timeline, consequences, and challenges. None were easy. All required substantial changes to their lifestyles and expectations. Throughout the discussion, I noticed a gradual shift in their responses. The initial defensiveness faded, replaced by reluctant acceptance and then active engagement with the realities. My father asked incisive questions about bankruptcy protection. My mother, surprisingly, proved quite practical about downsizing possibilities. Mark struggled the most, alternating between denial and bargaining, but eventually began considering which of his properties might be salvageable. By early afternoon, we had outlined the beginnings of a recovery plan. It was harsh medicine. My Parents would need to sell their home before the foreclosure completed, using any proceeds to secure a rental or much smaller property. My father would restructure his business, potentially bringing in a managing partner with fresh capital. Mark would need to declare business bankruptcy while trying to protect his family's primary residence through homestead exemptions. This is going to be extremely difficult, I cautioned as we wrapped up. And it requires immediate action. We don't have the luxury of time for second-guessing or gradual adjustments. We understand, my father said, exchanging glances with my mother. And Emily, thank you, not just for today, but for being willing to help despite. He trailed off, seemingly unsure how to reference the years of dismissal and the specific exclusion that had solidified my distance. Despite being excluded from Thanksgiving? I finished for him, deciding that if we were being brutally honest about finances, we could extend that honesty to our relationship. My mother flinched. That was a misunderstanding. No, it wasn't. My father interrupted, surprising all of us. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Linda. We deliberately didn't include Emily because the Wilsons were traditional investors who we thought might be uncomfortable with her lifestyle. The revelation hung in the air. My lifestyle, being single, career-focused, and independent, had been deemed inappropriate for potential investors. The exclusion had been calculated, not accidental. I see, I said, my voice cooling several degrees. It was wrong, my father continued, meeting my eyes directly. Not just morally wrong, but foolish. We valued the Wilsons' potential investment over your actual expertise and connection. And look where that got us. The irony was almost too perfect. The Wilsons, it turned out, had never invested in their ventures. The dinner that I had been excluded from had yielded nothing except deepening the rift in our family. My mother looked, close to tears. We've made so many mistakes, Emily, not just with money. Mark remained silent, staring at the financial projections I'd prepared. His expression was unreadable, but the slight slump of his shoulders suggested he too was processing difficult realizations. Well, I said after a moment, gathering the papers into organized stacks. Acknowledging mistakes is the first step toward correcting them, in finance and in relationships. Can we fix both? My mother asked quietly. It was the question I'd been asking myself since my father's initial call. Could we reconstruct our relationship while rebuilding their financial stability? Or would old patterns reassert themselves once the crisis passed? That depends, I answered honestly. Financial recovery has clear metrics: debt reduction, asset protection, income stability. Relationship recovery is less quantifiable. But not impossible, my father suggested, a question in his tone. No, I agreed. Not impossible, just uncertain. We concluded the meeting with clear next steps. They would contact a bankruptcy attorney from the list I provided, begin the mortgage restructuring process, and prepare the house for potential sale. I would review their business financials in more detail and create a comprehensive recovery timeline. We scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following weekend. As they gathered their things to leave, Mark finally spoke directly to me. You were right, he said simply, about everything. The market, the risks, the consequences. I should have listened. The admission surprised me. Mark had always been the most resistant to my financial perspective. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, a gesture reminiscent of our childhood disagreements. Pride, competition. The fact that you're my younger sister but somehow always seemed to understand things I couldn't grasp. It was easier to dismiss you than admit you saw things more clearly. His candor was unexpected and oddly touching. Well, clarity is literally my job, I replied, softening slightly. Analyzing risk is what I do every day. You're good at it, he acknowledged, better than I've been willing to admit. This small recognition, professional respect from the family member who had most actively dismissed my expertise felt like a significant shift. Not resolution, not full reconciliation, but a crack in the wall of dismissal that had defined our adult relationship. After they left, I remained in the conference room, surrounded by the documentation of their financial collapse. The Chen family forecast had been accurate in predicting their crisis, but it hadn't accounted for this potential outcome: that financial disaster might create an opening for more honest communication. I updated my recovery projection models, factoring in their new awareness and apparent willingness to take difficult but necessary actions. The path forward remained challenging, but their prospects looked marginally better than my initial assessment. The following weeks brought intense activity. My family moved with surprising decisiveness once they accepted the realities of their situation. My father contacted the bankruptcy attorney and began reorganization proceedings for his business. My mother, revealing unexpected practical strengths, coordinated their home downsizing, sorting possessions, researching rental options, preparing for an estate sale. Mark worked with his own attorney to protect his family's primary residence, while allowing his over-leveraged company to enter Chapter 7 proceedings. I served as their financial navigator, reviewing documents, suggesting strategies, providing the analytical perspective they had previously rejected. Each interaction reinforced our new dynamic. They asked questions rather than dismissing concerns. I offered expertise without expectation of rejection. The physical transformations mirrored the relational ones. My parents' sprawling suburban home, once showcasing their success, was gradually emptied of non-essential possessions. My father's office, previously decorated with expensive artwork and status symbols, was reorganized for efficiency rather than impression. Mark traded his luxury SUV for a modest sedan, a tangible acknowledgement of changed circumstances. Throughout this process, I maintained professional boundaries while allowing small openings for personal reconnection. I kept our financial discussions in my office during business hours, but occasionally accepted my mother's invitation for coffee afterwards. I declined Sunday family dinners but joined them for a simple lunch after meeting with their bankruptcy attorney. These were tentative steps on both sides, they unsure of my willingness to rebuild connection, me wary of returning to old patterns. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, about 6 weeks into our financial recovery process. I had stopped by my parents' home, now in the final stages of preparation for sale, to review some paperwork. As I waited for my father to locate the documents, I wandered into the living room where my mother was sorting through family photographs. "So many memories in this house," she said softly, noticing my presence. "Some I'll miss, others perhaps not." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this wistfulness. She held up a photo, me at college graduation, standing alone. "I wasn't there," she said, regret evident in her voice. "We chose to attend Mark's investment seminar instead. It was the wrong choice, one of many." The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. My family rarely admitted mistakes, particularly emotional ones. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. My mother set the photo aside carefully. "Because losing our house has made me realize what really matters. Not appearances or investments or what others think. Family, connection, being present for important moments." She looked up at me directly. "We've failed at that with you, Emily. Consistently." The honesty was disarming. "Yes," I agreed quietly. "You have. And yet, when everything fell apart, you still helped us. Despite how we've treated you." I considered my response carefully. "I helped because I could, because financial analysis is something I understand. It doesn't erase the past." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But maybe it can be the beginning of something different." She picked up another photo, a much older one of all 4 of us at the beach, everyone smiling, my small hand clasped in my father's. "We were a family once," before expectations and comparisons and disappointments got in the way. Maybe we can be again. Not the same, but something new. The conversation was interrupted by my father returning with the documents. But something had shifted. A genuine acknowledgement had been offered, not the defensive justifications or revisionist history I'd grown accustomed to. It was a small moment, but significant, like the first positive number after a long sequence of negatives in a financial recovery trend. That evening, I updated their financial recovery plan with new projections. The bankruptcy proceedings were progressing efficiently. The house had received a reasonable offer despite the market conditions. My father's business restructuring showed promise for long-term viability on a smaller scale. Mark had secured a position with an established real estate firm, trading entrepreneurial risk for steady income. Their financial forecast, while still challenging, showed increasing stability. What I couldn't quantify was the parallel recovery in our relationship, the gradual rebuilding of trust, the tentative acknowledgments of past wrongs, the small moments of genuine connection emerging from the rubble of financial collapse. In my professional experience, financial recovery followed predictable patterns when clients adhered to structured plans. Relationship recovery was less mappable, more organic, subject to setbacks and unexpected breakthroughs. Both required honesty, consistent effort, and willingness to face uncomfortable truths. As I closed my laptop that night, I realized I was cautiously optimistic about both trajectories. Not because the path would be easy or the outcomes guaranteed, but because crisis had created clarity. Financial collapse had stripped away the pretenses and patterns that had defined our family dynamic for decades. In losing their material foundation, my family seemed to be rediscovering something more essential: the possibility of authentic connection based on truth rather than expectation. It was too soon to know whether this transformation would endure beyond the immediate crisis. Human nature tended toward reversion to familiar patterns, comfortable illusions, established hierarchies. But their financial recovery would take years, creating an extended period where new patterns might take root and strengthen. And regardless of their journey, I had experienced my own revelation through this process. In documenting their financial decline and guiding their recovery, I had reclaimed my professional identity within our family context. I was neither the overlooked daughter nor the vengeful oracle taking satisfaction in predicted downfall. I was simply Emily Chen, financial analyst, offering expertise where it was finally valued. That identity, clear, defined, respected, would remain mine regardless of how our family story continued to unfold. 3 months into the financial recovery process, I found myself in an unexpected position, standing in the middle of a modest condominium, helping my parents decide which of their remaining furniture would fit in the significantly smaller space. The sprawling suburban home that had been their pride for 3 decades was now sold, the proceeds barely covering the outstanding mortgage after the market decline. This 2-bedroom unit in a senior-friendly complex was their new reality. "What do you think about the dining table in this corner?" my mother asked, gesturing to a space by the window. The formal dining set that had hosted countless family gatherings had been sold at the estate sale, replaced by a simple round table that had previously been in their breakfast nook. "It works," I said, mentally calculating the dimensions. "You'll need to get rid of at least 2 chairs, though." My father entered from the bedroom, where he'd been measuring for bookshelf placement. "The master barely fits our bed and 1 dresser," he reported, his tone matter-of-fact rather than complaining. This practical acceptance of their diminished circumstances still surprised me. The Robert Chen I'd grown up with had been adamant about appearances, about projecting success and prosperity regardless of underlying realities. This new version, who could calmly assess that his bedroom had shrunk by 2/3, was someone I was still getting to know. "We don't need much," my mother replied, smoothing her hand over the table's surface. "Just the essentials." The conversation would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. My parents willingly downsizing, prioritizing practicality over status, consulting me not just on financial matters, but on living arrangements. Crisis had forced a fundamental reevaluation of priorities that no amount of warning or advising could have accomplished. I checked my watch. I need to head back to the office for a client meeting, but I can stop by tomorrow evening to help, with the kitchen unpacking if you'd like. That would be wonderful, my mother said. I'll make dinner. Nothing fancy, just some simple stir-fry. Don't go to any trouble, I cautioned, still wary of falling back into old patterns where surface appearances masked deeper issues. It's not trouble, she assured me. Cooking helps me think, and we need to eat anyway. On my drive back downtown, I reflected on the incremental shifts in our relationship. The formal financial meetings at my office had gradually expanded to include these more personal interactions, helping with the move, discussing everyday logistics, sharing occasional meals. We were creating a new template for family connection, built on the foundation of honest financial reckoning, but extending beyond it. At Pacific Northwest Financial, I found Nathan waiting by my office door, an unusual occurrence in the middle of the day. "Everything okay?" I asked, unlocking my door. "Just wanted to check on the Chen family recovery plan," he said, following me inside. Nathan had been supportive throughout the process, offering informal advice and occasionally adjusting my client schedule to accommodate family emergencies. "Surprisingly on track," I replied, setting down my bag. "The house sale closed last week. They're moving into the condo now. Dad's business restructuring is proceeding through the courts. Mark's personal bankruptcy protected his home, but not much else." "And emotionally?" I appreciated that Nathan always considered the human element alongside the financial metrics. It was what made him exceptional in our field. "Also surprisingly on track," I said after a moment's consideration. "They're adapting better than I expected. Less resistance, more acceptance, even gratitude." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Financial crisis often strips away pretense. Some people discover what truly matters. Others become bitter and entrenched. They seem to be in the first category," I observed, "at least for now. And you? This can't be easy, watching your family go through this while guiding them through it." I hadn't given much thought to my own emotional response lately, too focused on the practical aspects of their recovery plan. "It's complex," I admitted. "Part of me still resents that it took complete financial collapse for them to value my expertise and presence. Another part recognizes that genuine change is happening, whatever prompted it. Both perspectives can be simultaneously true," Nathan pointed out. "The question is, which one you allow to define your path forward." His words stayed with me throughout. My afternoon meetings, the tension between justified resentment and potential reconciliation. Which would I prioritize? Which would serve both my well-being and the recovered relationship I cautiously hoped might emerge from this crisis? My client meeting ran late, as complex estate planning discussions often did. By the time I returned to my apartment, it was past 8, and I was mentally exhausted. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of Pinot Noir, and sank onto my sofa, enjoying the cityscape view through my floor-to-ceiling windows. This space, modern, minimal, entirely mine, had been my sanctuary during the years of family estrangement. Now it felt slightly disconnected from the person I was becoming through this reconciliation process. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Dad's business restructuring approved by court today. Small miracle. Thank you for the attorney recommendation." The message was simple, but significant. Mark acknowledging my contribution, expressing gratitude without qualification. Another small step in our evolving dynamic. "Good news," I texted back. "Let me know when the final paperwork comes through and we'll review the terms." His response came quickly. "Will do. Sophia asking if you'd consider dinner at our place next week. Kids miss their aunt." This was more complicated territory. My Relationship with Mark's children had been distant by necessity during the estrangement. His oldest, Lily, was now 10, with memories of holiday gatherings before the rift. The twins, Jason and Michael, were only 6, with little connection to me beyond vague recognition. The invitation represented another potential layer of reconnection, not just with my brother, but with the next generation of our family. "I'll check my schedule," I replied noncommittally. In truth, my hesitation had nothing to do with availability, and everything to do with boundaries. Family dinner at Mark's home represented a significant step toward normalizing relations, one I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. The following evening, I arrived at my parents' new condo with a housewarming gift, a compact herb garden, for their small balcony. My mother had always enjoyed growing fresh herbs, but had never had much time for gardening while maintaining the large suburban home. Perhaps the downsizing would allow for new interests, or the revival of old ones long neglected. "This is perfect," she exclaimed, examining the tiered planters. "I was just saying to your father that the balcony needs something green." The condo was still in disarray, boxes stacked in corners, picture frames leaning against walls awaiting decisions about placement. But the kitchen was functional, and my mother had indeed prepared a simple stir-fry with rice. We ate at the round table, now positioned exactly where she had envisioned it, with the evening sun casting a warm glow through the westward-facing windows. The conversation flowed more easily than I had anticipated, focusing on practical matters, the condo association rules, the proximity to grocery stores and doctors' offices, the adjustment to shared walls after decades in a detached home. My father mentioned neighbors they had met, seeming genuinely interested in building new connections rather than lamenting lost status. As we cleared the dishes, my mother hesitated before asking, "Have you thought about Mark's dinner invitation?" So they were discussing me amongst themselves again. In the past, this would have raised my defenses immediately. Family conversations about Emily, the outlier, the one who didn't quite fit the Chen family mold. But her tone lacked the judgment I had grown accustomed to detecting. "I'm considering it," I replied honestly. "It's a big step." "Too big?" she asked perceptively. I loaded plates into their dishwasher, buying time to organize my thoughts. "Maybe. I'm still finding my footing in this new version of our family. Adding Mark's household to the equation complicates things." My mother nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You've established boundaries. We're learning to respect them. You're worried that expanding the circle might undermine that progress." Her insight surprised me. The Linda Chen I had known before the financial crisis had rarely demonstrated such emotional perception, particularly regarding my feelings. "Something like that," I acknowledged. "Plus, the children, they barely know me. I'm essentially a stranger who shares some DNA." "Children adapt quickly," my father contributed unexpectedly, joining the conversation from where he'd been unpacking books nearby. "And they're less burdened by the past than we are." "That's true," I conceded. "I just don't want to rush into family dynamics that might revert to old patterns." My father set down the book he was holding and looked at me directly. "Emily, when you agreed to help us with the financial recovery plan, you made it clear that honesty was non-negotiable. I'd like to offer the same standard now." I braced myself, uncertain what was coming. "Mark has changed," he said simply. "Not just financially, but fundamentally. Losing his company, facing bankruptcy, starting over as an employee rather than an entrepreneur, it's humbled him in ways I wouldn't have thought possible. His perspective on family, on what matters, has shifted dramatically." My skepticism must have shown on my face, because he continued with unexpected candor. "I know you have every reason to doubt that. Mark has been challenging to you over the years, competitive, dismissive. We encouraged it, I'm ashamed to admit. It was easier to elevate him than to acknowledge that both our children had different but equal strengths. His recent success validated our worldview. Your success challenged it. The admission hung in the air between us, an unprecedented acknowledgement of the family dynamic that had shaped our relationships for decades. Now, my father continued after a moment, his understanding of success has been completely upended. He's reevaluating everything, including his relationship with you. The dinner invitation isn't just social nicety. It's part of his own reconciliation process. I absorbed this, trying to separate my ingrained distrust from the possibility that genuine change might be occurring for Mark as it apparently was for my parents. I'll think about it, I promised, more sincerely this time. As I drove home that evening, I found myself at an unexpected crossroads. For years, I had defined myself partly in opposition to my family's dismissal. I was the financial expert, whose expertise they ignored, the daughter whose achievements they minimized, the family member they could exclude when convenient. That identity had a certain clarity and protection built into it. Shifting toward reconciliation meant redefining myself in relation to them, which felt both promising and dangerous. I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building and sat in my car, still processing the conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Drink at Rosewood? I'm in your neighborhood." Lucas's timing was impeccable as always. If anyone could help me navigate this territory, it was the friend who had supported me through both estrangement and tentative reconciliation. 20 minutes later, we were ensconced in a quiet corner of Rosewood Cafe, wine glasses in hand. I had explained the dinner invitation dilemma and my parents' surprising insights about Mark's transformation. "So the golden child has fallen from his pedestal," Lucas observed, "and now seeks reconciliation with the sister whose wisdom he rejected." It's almost mythological. I smiled despite myself. Lucas had a gift for distilling complex family dynamics into elegant narratives. Mythological or not, I'm not sure I'm ready to extend the rebuilding process to include him and his family. "What's the real fear?" Lucas asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. That he hasn't changed and will revert to old patterns? Or that he has changed and you'll need to revise your understanding of him? The question struck uncomfortably close to truth. Maybe both. The family narrative has been so consistent for so long. Mark as the favored son, me as the respected but not quite fitting daughter. If that's truly changing, it requires me to change too. "And you've found strength in being the outsider," Lucas noted. "The one who saw clearly, who predicted the collapse, whose expertise was finally validated." "There's power in that position?" "There is," I acknowledged. "But there's isolation too." Lucas swirled his wine thoughtfully. "What would the financial analyst in you say about this situation? If it were a client's decision rather than your own?" I considered this perspective shift. I'd probably approach it as a risk assessment. Potential benefits of reconciliation versus potential costs of re-entering potentially toxic dynamics. Likelihood of sustained change versus temporary crisis-induced behavior modification. "And your preliminary analysis?" "Inconclusive," I admitted. "The sample size is too small. 3 months of improved dynamics could be an anomaly or the beginning of a trend. And the variables are complex. Individual psychology, family systems, external pressures. So the analyst would recommend more data collection before major position changes," Lucas summarized. "Exactly. Maintain cautious engagement while monitoring for pattern consistency." Lucas smiled. Which means maybe I accept the dinner invitation, but with clear boundaries and expectations. Test the waters without full immersion. "Sounds like a sensible approach," he approved. "And remember, you're not the same person you were before this process began either. You've grown stronger, more confident in expressing your needs and boundaries. The Emily who was excluded from Thanksgiving dinner wouldn't have confronted her family directly about their pattern of dismissal." His observation was accurate. Through the financial recovery process, I had found my voice within the family system. not just professionally, but personally. I had named the dynamics openly, rather, than accommodating them silently. I had established expectations for honesty and respect that would have seemed impossible before. "You're right," I acknowledged. "I have changed too." So perhaps the question isn't whether Mark has changed enough to deserve reconciliation, but whether the new dynamics between you offer something worth exploring. Lucas's reframing resonated. Rather than focusing on past wounds or individual worthiness, I could assess the evolving relationship itself, its current health, its potential, its alignment with my values and needs. "I'll go to dinner," I decided, with clear eyes and strong boundaries. "And I'll be on standby for post-dinner processing," Lucas promised, raising his glass. The following week, I texted Mark accepting his dinner invitation. His response was simple but satisfying. "Great. Sophia's excited. No pressure, just family dinner. Casual." The explicit, no pressure acknowledgement suggested awareness of my hesitation. Another small indication of potential change. I found myself cautiously optimistic as Friday evening approached. Mark and Sophia's home had changed since my last visit years ago. Gone were many of the obvious status symbols, the original artwork, the custom furniture. The decor was now simpler, more functional. The downsizing wasn't as dramatic as my parents' move from house to condo, but it was noticeable nonetheless. Sophia greeted me warmly at the door. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant. She had aligned herself with Mark's perspective on family dynamics, as spouses often do. "Thank you for coming," she said, accepting the bottle of wine I'd brought. "It means a lot to all of us." Inside, the children's reactions varied as expected. Lily remembered me, greeting me with the slightly formal politeness of a child who recognizes a relative but has no close connection. The twins regarded me with open curiosity, hiding partially behind their father until coaxed forward for introductions. Mark himself seemed genuinely nervous, a state I had rarely observed in my typically overconfident brother. He hovered, offering drinks, asking about my drive, creating conversational bridges with visible effort. Dinner itself was pleasantly ordinary: homemade lasagna, salad, garlic bread. The conversation flowed more naturally than I had anticipated, focusing on neutral topics: the children's school activities, a hiking trail Sophia had recently discovered, a documentary series I had been watching. No one mentioned the financial situation directly, though its effects were evident in the scaled-back surroundings and lifestyle references. After dessert, when the children had been excused to play in the family room within earshot, but not actively participating in adult conversation, Mark cleared his throat with obvious intention. "Emily, I want to thank you again for everything you've done for our family these past few months," he began. "Not just the financial guidance, which has been invaluable, but for being willing to re-engage at all after how we treated you." The directness was unexpected and somewhat uncomfortable. Part of me had anticipated, perhaps even preferred, that we might rebuild connection without explicitly acknowledging the past wounds. But Mark seemed determined to address them head-on. "You were right," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "About the financial risks, about the market trends, about everything you tried to warn us about for years. I dismissed your expertise because acknowledging it threatened my self-image as the family financial authority. It was insecure and short-sighted." Sophia reached over to squeeze his hand supportively. This was clearly a rehearsed moment, something they had discussed privately before my arrival. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "The past few months have shown that your capacity for adaptation is greater than I might have anticipated." "Losing everything forces rapid growth," Mark replied with a wry smile that held genuine self-awareness. "Or complete collapse. I was fortunate to have family support that prevented the latter." "Family support you hadn't exactly cultivated," I pointed out, unwilling to let this critical point slide. "No," he acknowledged without defensiveness. I hadn't. I took for granted that family would be there on my terms, centering my needs and priorities. The Thanksgiving exclusion was just the most obvious example of a pattern that had existed for years. The explicit naming of the incident startled me. In our family's previous communication style, such directness about uncomfortable topics was rare. "Why bring this up now?" I asked. "We've been working together on the financial recovery for months without discussing it." Mark looked directly at me, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. "Because we're at a crossroads," he said simply. "The financial crisis forced us to rebuild practically everything about our lives. But material reconstruction without emotional reconciliation seems hollow. I don't want to just save what's left of our assets. I want to save what's left of our family." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the Mark I'd known. The confident, sometimes arrogant brother who had dismissed my financial cautions and accepted my familial exclusion as necessary collateral damage in pursuing his ambitions. This was someone humbled by circumstance, genuinely reflecting on past mistakes. "That's a laudable goal," I acknowledged carefully. "But reconstruction takes time. And trust, once broken, doesn't automatically reset because circumstances change." "I know," he nodded. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or pretending the past didn't happen. I'm just asking for the chance to build something better going forward." Sophia, who had been quiet during this exchange, spoke up. "We've had a lot of difficult conversations these past few months about priorities, values, what we're teaching our children through our choices. The financial collapse forced us to confront realities we'd been ignoring, including how we've treated family relationships as disposable." Her candor surprised me. Sophia had always been pleasant, but somewhat detached in family dynamics, deferring to Mark's judgment. This more assertive, reflective stance suggested changes in their relationship as well. "The children ask about you," she continued, "especially Lily. She remembers when you used to be more present at family gatherings. She asks why Aunt Emily doesn't come around anymore. We've tried to be honest, in age-appropriate ways, about our responsibility for the distance." The mention of the children shifted something in me. Whatever resentments existed between Mark and me, the next generation deserved the opportunity for healthier family connections. "I appreciate your candor," I said finally, "and your willingness to acknowledge the past directly rather than glossing over it. That's new." "Everything's new," Mark said with a rueful smile. "New financial reality, new career path, new perspective on what actually matters. The only question is whether our relationship can be new too, or if too much damage has been done." It was the question I'd been asking myself since my father's first desperate call, whether reconciliation was possible or even desirable after years of dismissal culminating in deliberate exclusion. The financial recovery process had provided a structured framework for re-engagement, but this dinner represented something beyond professional obligation. This was personal territory, where spreadsheets and projections offered no guidance. "I don't know the answer yet," I admitted. "But I'm here tonight. That's a start." The relief on both their faces was palpable. They weren't expecting immediate resolution, just openness to possibility. It struck me that perhaps this was the healthiest interaction our family had managed in years. Honest acknowledgement of past wounds, realistic expectations for healing, willingness to engage without guarantees. The evening concluded with a tour of Lily's art projects and the twins' elaborate Lego construction. As I prepared to leave, Lily approached somewhat shyly. "Will you come back again, Aunt Emily?" she asked, her directness reminiscent of how I'd been as a child, straightforward questions where others might circle cautiously. "I think so," I replied honestly. "Would you like that?" She nodded seriously. "Dad says you're really good with numbers and helping people with money. I'm good at math too. Maybe you could tell me about your job sometime." The simple request touched something deep within me, the recognition that despite years of estrangement, connections could form across generations based on shared interests rather than obligatory family ties. Here was a niece showing genuine curiosity about my professional life, something my own parents had barely acknowledged until financial disaster forced them to. "I'd like that very much," I told her, meaning it completely. On the drive home, I found myself contemplating the unexpected evening. The dinner invitation had initially seemed like a test of my willingness to extend the reconciliation process beyond my parents to include Mark's family. What it had actually revealed was the extent of change occurring not just in circumstances, but in fundamental perspectives. Mark's acknowledgement of the Thanksgiving exclusion and the pattern it represented was unprecedented in our family's communication style. Sophia's reflections on their shared responsibility for relationship breakdowns suggested genuine soul-searching rather than crisis-induced compliance. Even the children's simple acceptance of my reappearance in their lives pointed toward possibilities for connection unencumbered by past tensions. When I arrived at my apartment, I found an email from Nathan waiting. A client had experienced a sudden financial reversal and needed immediate assistance. The parallels to my family's situation 8 months ago were striking, though the circumstances differed. I immediately began preparing materials for an emergency consultation the following morning, grateful for the professional focus after an emotionally complex evening. Hours later, as I finally prepared for bed, I realized I hadn't updated the Chen family recovery plan in nearly 3 weeks, the longest gap since beginning the financial reconstruction process. The compulsion to document and project had gradually diminished as their situation stabilized and our relationships evolved. The spreadsheet remained important professionally, but its emotional significance had waned. I no longer needed numerical validation of my predictions or documentary evidence of their changed circumstances. Reality had confirmed both. The following morning brought fresh challenges with the distressed client, requiring my full analytical attention. By mid-afternoon, we had developed a stabilization strategy that would prevent immediate asset loss while creating space for longer-term restructuring. The client's relief was palpable, even through the professional veneer of our interaction. "You've saved us from complete disaster," he said as our meeting concluded. "How did you develop such expertise in financial crisis management?" I smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've had relevant experience recently." Nathan caught up with me as the client departed. "Excellent work today. You handled that situation perfectly. Technically sound advice delivered with genuine empathy. That's a rare combination in our field." "I've had practice balancing the technical and emotional aspects lately," I acknowledged. "Your family situation has made you a better advisor," Nathan observed. "Sometimes personal challenges create professional growth if we're open to the lessons." His observation resonated. The family financial crisis that had initially seemed like painful validation of my ignored warnings had ultimately enhanced my professional capabilities in unexpected ways. I had always been technically proficient. Now I brought deeper understanding of the human dimensions of financial collapse, the psychological impact, the relational strain, the possibility of reconstruction beyond mere asset recovery. That evening, I received a text from my mother. "Your father and I are volunteering at the community center tomorrow morning. Nothing special, just helping sort donations for the housing assistance program. Would you like to join us?" Another invitation, another opportunity for reconnection. But this one struck me as particularly meaningful. My parents weren't asking me to witness their diminished circumstances or provide financial expertise. They were inviting me to participate in something they found valuable, giving back to a community support system similar to what had helped them navigate their own housing transition. "I'll be there," I replied. "What time?" "Saturday morning." Found me at the Lake Oswego Community Center, sorting donated household items alongside my parents and a dozen other volunteers. My father worked methodically, organizing kitchen supplies with the same attention to detail he had once applied. to business acquisitions. My mother chatted easily with other volunteers, her natural warmth finding expression in this new context. "We come every week now," she explained as we arranged bedding sets. After downsizing, we realized how many perfectly good items we'd accumulated that others could use. And the center was so helpful when we needed information about affordable housing options. "It's a good program," I agreed, folding a quilt that reminded me of one that had been in our family home for years. "We donated that one," my mother said, noticing my recognition. "So many things we thought we needed. Turns out most were just weighing us down." The philosophical shift implicit in her comment struck me. My mother had always been house-proud, investing substantial energy in creating and maintaining the perfect family home with all the appropriate accoutrements. Now she spoke of those possessions as burdens rather than achievements. "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The house? The lifestyle?" She considered the question seriously. "Parts of it. I miss my garden. The space for family gatherings." She folded a pillowcase with careful precision. "But I don't miss the pressure, the constant awareness of appearances, the energy spent maintaining things instead of relationships." My father joined us, carrying a box of children's books. "The condo association is starting a little library in the common room. Thought these might be good donations." "From your collection?" I asked, surprised. My father's books had been prized possessions, carefully accumulated over decades. "Just some of them," he clarified. "I'm keeping the ones that matter most. The rest, well, books should be read, not stored." The simple wisdom in his statement reflected the broader transformation I'd been observing. A shift from accumulation to distribution, from status to service, from appearance to essence. My parents were creating a new narrative for themselves that had nothing to do with financial success or material possessions, centered instead on community connection and purposeful simplicity. As we worked together, a young family entered the donation center. Mother, father, 2 small children. Their clothes were clean but worn, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and determination. The staff greeted them warmly, explaining the ITI process for selecting needed household items after relocating to emergency housing. My father watched them thoughtfully. "That could have been us," he said quietly. "Without your help, we might have lost everything, not just the house." "You didn't lose everything," I pointed out. "The financial restructuring preserved your retirement security. Dad's business survived in modified form. You made a controlled transition rather than a desperate one. Not just financially," my mother added. "Without your guidance, we might have lost our dignity, our sense of control over our future, maybe even our marriage. Financial disaster destroys many relationships." The acknowledgement of how differently their situation might have unfolded without intervention was sobering. Financial collapse rarely affected only material circumstances. The collateral damage typically included psychological well-being, relational stability, and social connection. My professional expertise had indeed spared them the worst possibilities, providing a structured path through crisis rather than a free fall into catastrophe. "We never properly thanked you," my father continued, "not just for the financial guidance, but for being willing to help at all after how we treated you." "You've thanked me several times," I reminded him. "Words are easy," he replied. "Living gratitude is harder, showing through actions that we understand the gift we were given. That's what we're trying to do now, with you, with each other, with our community." His sincerity was unmistakable. This wasn't performative gratitude or crisis-induced compliance. This was genuine reflection on values and priorities, reassessment of what constituted meaningful life. Whether such profound change could have occurred without financial catastrophe was impossible to know, but its authenticity seemed undeniable. After the volunteer shift ended, we had lunch at a modest cafe nearby, another shift from the upscale restaurants that had once been my parents' preference. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on their new community involvements, my recent work challenges, even tentative plans for a family gathering that might include Mark's children, and Lucas, my closest friend whom they had finally begun to acknowledge as an important person in my life. As I drove back to my apartment afterward, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past 10 months. What had begun with deliberate exclusion from a family holiday had evolved through financial collapse into a complex process of reconciliation and reconstruction. The spreadsheet I had created to document their inevitable financial downfall had transformed into a recovery plan that helped navigate their way forward. The professional distance I had maintained for protection had gradually shifted to allow personal reconnection on new terms. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced in subtle ways. My father sometimes slipped into directive mode rather than collaborative discussion. My mother occasionally made comments that revealed lingering class consciousness. Mark still struggled with fully acknowledging the extent of his financial miscalculations. But the trajectory was undeniably positive, marked by increasing self-awareness and genuine effort toward healthier interactions. The following week brought an unexpected development. Nathan called me into his office for what I assumed was a routine client discussion. "I've been watching your management of the Chen family financial recovery with interest," he began, surprising me with the personal reference in our professional setting. "Your ability to balance technical expertise with emotional intelligence in a complex situation has been remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, uncertain where this was heading. "We've received a request from Westlake Credit Union," he continued. "They're developing a specialized division focused on family financial crisis intervention, helping clients navigate sudden downturns, business failures, medical bankruptcies, and similar situations with an approach that addresses both financial and relational aspects. They're looking for someone to head the division. I recommended you. The opportunity was unexpected but intriguing. A chance to formalize the expertise I'd developed through my family's situation into a professional specialty that could help others navigate similar crises." "It would mean building something new," Nathan explained. "Developing protocols, training staff, creating resources that address the human dimensions of financial collapse alongside technical solutions. Based on what I've observed these past months, I believe you're uniquely qualified." I considered the possibility. My career path had always focused on traditional financial advisory services, gradually expanding my client base and moving up within established firm structures. This represented something different, leveraging painful personal experience into specialized professional expertise. "I'd need to think about it," I said. "It's not the direction I had envisioned." "Sometimes the most meaningful opportunities aren't the ones we envision for ourselves," Nathan observed. "They're the ones that emerge from our most challenging experiences." His words echoed in my mind as I left his office. The Chen family forecast had begun as documentation of financial mistakes I had warned against and been ignored. The Chen family recovery plan had evolved into a roadmap for reconstruction, beyond mere financial stability. Perhaps there was another evolution possible, transforming those personal and painful lessons into professional wisdom that could guide others through similar territory. That evening, I found myself creating a new spreadsheet, this one projecting the potential development of a family financial crisis intervention practice. The variables were different from standard investment models, incorporating psychological factors, relational dynamics, and community resources alongside traditional financial metrics. It was analysis informed by experience, expertise expanded by empathy. My phone rang, interrupting my work. It was my father. "Emily, sorry to bother you in the evening, but I wanted to run something by you." Once this call would have signaled another financial emergency. Now it represented something healthier. Consultation before decisions rather than rescue after disaster. "What's up, Dad?" I've been offered a chance to mentor some young entrepreneurs starting small businesses, he explained, through a community development program. No pay, just advisory sessions twice monthly. I'm considering it, but wanted your thoughts first. The request for my opinion, not just on financial matters but on life direction, represented perhaps the most profound shift in our relationship. My father, once the unquestioned authority on business and financial matters, now valued my perspective on his personal choices. I think it sounds perfect for you, I said honestly. Your experience, even with the setbacks, would be invaluable to people just starting out, and it keeps you connected to the business world without the pressures of running your own company. That's what I thought too, he said, relief evident in his voice. Your mother was supportive but suggested I check with you since it involves business advising. I'm glad you did, I told him. Not because you needed my permission, but because it's nice to be consulted. We're learning, he acknowledged. Slowly, maybe, but we're learning. After we hung up, I returned to my projections for the potential new professional direction. The variables were complex, the outcomes uncertain, but uncertainty no longer seemed threatening. It was simply the reality of both financial markets and human relationships. What mattered was not perfect prediction, but thoughtful navigation of whatever unfolded. 6 weeks later, I accepted the position with Westlake Credit Union, with Nathan's blessing and support for a gradual transition from my current client base. My first official act was to create a foundational document for the new division, Financial Crisis Recovery, Integrated, Approaches to Fiscal and Family Reconstruction. The opening paragraph acknowledged my inspiration. This approach emerges from both professional expertise and personal experience. Financial crisis is never merely about numbers. It is about identity, relationships, and core values revealed under pressure. Effective intervention addresses not only balance sheets and asset protection, but the human dimensions of loss, adaptation, and renewal. Our goal is not simply restored financial stability, but reconstructed lives built on authentic priorities. The night after submitting the document to the bank's executive team, I received a text from my mother. Thanksgiving planning. Our condo is too small, but we've reserved the community room. Mark and Sophia hosting seems wrong given history. Would you consider hosting at your apartment? Just family plus Lucas if you'd like. Understand completely if you prefer not. The request carried undeniable symbolic weight. Thanksgiving, the holiday from which I had been deliberately excluded 3 years ago, was now being centered around my inclusion, with my home as the gathering place. The significance wasn't lost on any of us. I stared at the message for several minutes, weighing the implications. Hosting Thanksgiving represented more than a meal. It symbolized my full reintegration into family celebrations, my central rather than peripheral position in family connections. It also represented final closure of the cycle that had begun with exclusion and progressed through crisis to reconciliation. I'd be happy to host, I texted back. My place at Ford Eye. I'll handle the turkey if everyone brings sides. Her response came immediately. Wonderful. I'll coordinate the sides. Your father says thank you. I smiled at the simplicity of the exchange. Practical, warm, without dramatic declarations or excessive gratitude. Just family planning a holiday together, the way healthy families did. Whether we had truly become a healthy family remained to be seen, but we had certainly progressed from where we'd been. As I prepared for bed, I noticed the Chen family recovery plan still open on my laptop. The projections had largely played out as anticipated. Financial stabilization achieved, downsizing completed, restructured business operations proceeding. But the spreadsheet couldn't capture the less quantifiable aspects of recovery. The psychological resilience developed, the relational patterns transformed, the values clarified through crisis. Some things defied numerical analysis. Some recoveries couldn't be projected with even the most sophisticated models. Sometimes the most important outcomes were those you never thought to include in your original calculations. I saved the file one last time, then closed my laptop. The forecast had served its purpose, both professionally and personally. The financial story it had documented was nearing conclusion. But the family story continued to unfold, each day bringing new opportunities for connection on healthier terms. The cycle that began with exclusion had transformed through crisis into reconciliation. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine. Not what I had expected when documenting their inevitable financial collapse, but perhaps something more valuable than vindication. The possibility of relationship rebuilt on foundations of honesty, respect, and mutual valuing. Thanksgiving was 6 weeks away. There would be practical preparations, potential tensions, awkward moments as we navigated this new territory. But for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to a family holiday without dread or resentment. Just the simple anticipation of gathering with people who were learning, as I was, that some things matter more than money, more than pride, more than being right. Sometimes exclusion becomes the catalyst for creating something entirely new. Not just restored connection, but transformed understanding of what connection should be. Up next, you've got 2 more stand out. Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.